So in the past 20 years that I've been writing about marriage and family, the number one response I've heard from women across the board, over and over again, is, I wish someone had told me this 20 years ago. It just keeps happening over and over, that same comment. And it's frustrating in a way because I do relationship coaching and I get a lot of these women when they're in their 30s and 40s, and they've created lives that have kind of caused problems in their lives now, today. And they need to sort of disentangle all of that, and that's where I come in to try to help them with that. But really my heart is in getting to them before that happens. Why are we not talking to them 20 years earlier about these things? Doesn't make any sense to me at all. So you might ask, what are those things that they're referring to when they say, I wish someone had told me these things? So I tried to think about what are the main themes of everything I've written and talked about over the last 20 years, and I tried to narrow it down to two, which is a little silly, but hopefully this will encompass it. The first one is that men and women are equal in value, but wildly different by nature. And that these differences only magnify the older you get, the more time marches on. So it's very easy to think of men and women as quote-unquote equal, as in the same or similar, when you're younger, because you're both doing similar things. You're going to school, you're going to work, and it does feel kind of like you're the same. It's not until pretty much right around when women start to turn 30, when the biological clock is ticking, and all of a sudden they think, ooh, maybe we're not equal after all, because men aren't having any problem when they're hitting 30. And it's then that the obvious just becomes obvious. The second thing is that who you marry and how that marriage fares will have the greatest effect on your happiness and well-being than anything else you do. Who you marry. It's the most important decision of your life. Not where you're going to go to school, although that's already been decided, or what career you're going to have. Because you can switch a career or a job. People do it all the time. You can't just switch out a husband the way you can switch out a job. People try. So I wouldn't recommend it over and over again. So knowing this, right? Knowing that these two things are true, that men and women are wildly different by nature, and that who a person marries has the single greatest effect on your happiness and well-being. What sense does it make to spend zero time focused on that at this stage of your life? Why is there no relationship education in schools? There should be. But the culture doesn't care about your personal life. Instead, you're fed lies by the culture about men, about women, about sex, about marriage and divorce, about work and family, that are designed to further a political agenda. They're not designed to help you in any way. Well, of course, why would it be? It's a lie, so why would it help you? There's an agenda there at play, and you're up against it every day, every time you wake up and you turn on the news. It's sad because you don't live in a culture that is supportive in this way, but that's where we are. So that's why my overall message is about rejecting those lies and rejecting the culture and thinking for yourself and mapping out your life very differently. It's also frustrating that parents, maybe not yours, but parents in general, are not passing on information, this same information that women say they wish they knew, about life and about love and about men and sex and marriage and all of that early on. They should be. Because that helps children, of course, or young adults make smart decisions. Yes, your education is important. Finding meaningful work is important. But for the majority of women in this room, these things will eventually move, someday, to the background of your life. The older you get, the less important what you happen to be doing right now is going to matter. So what's needed then, in my opinion, is perspective. Perspective on this time of your life and what it is you're doing. And thinking about your life in thinking about the long haul, not just the next 5 or 10 years, but imagining yourself 20 years, 25 years from now, or even just 15, Where do you want to be? What do you want to be doing? What do you see your day looking like? What's your lifestyle like? What do you imagine it to be? This is very important, rather than just worrying about getting through the next year and the next 5 years. And then interestingly, when I was preparing for this talk, just last week, a brand new study came out from Pew, and it was very much focused, well, the gist of the study is that marriage is down, cohabitation is up. That probably won't surprise you. And it was a very lengthy study that was just sort of comparing those two things, marriage and cohabitation, but there was one graph on that study that stood out to me. It said small shares of Americans ages 18 to 44 view marriage as essential for a fulfilling life. But guess what they do think of as essential for a fulfilling and meaningful life? A job, their career. This is in large part, the reason why these numbers are so striking is because this is in large part because women are now putting work first in their lives in addition to men. In the past, it was men who pretty much put that at the forefront. Now with women doing that as well, there's really nobody left that's really focused at all on marriage and the family. So the gist of that study is that more and more Americans are valuing and prioritizing work over family, which I thought was really interesting that just happened last week as I was coming here to tell you basically to do the opposite. Okay, and then this morning, I don't know if you all know Joy Pullman of The Federalist. I highly recommend her writing if you have not read her before, but I get her posts, and this came in just this morning, so I thought I'd add it to this talk. She was responding to Kamala Harris's proposal for 10 hours of school for kids. In that piece, she wrote, "Too many Americans, especially politicians, act as if a career is the highest source of fulfillment. This is not true, and thus is distorting policy and culture. Kids definitely get in the way of making money, having fun, and achieving career glory. Yet one of the glorious things about children is that they order your priorities in the right way." So, why have that realization come down the road when you have a baby in your arms? Why not know that ahead of time? My message to you is to be intentional. Be very, very intentional about all aspects of your life. The most important question you need to answer is this one. I'm going to attempt to write on the board. It's, can I move and write on the board or not? I guess I can. I'll just go right behind me so you can get that. I used to be a high school English teacher. I haven't written on the board in a long time. What do you want? It sounds like such a simple question. Like a silly question almost. Well, of course I know what I want. Okay, maybe so. But figure out what that is. Even write it down. And then you need to rearrange it so that you put the one or two non-negotiables at the top of the list. What is it? This is going to help you with prioritizing what it is you want and how to structure your life. What is the number one thing? Because if you have that number one thing, then all the choices that you make can orbit around that one thing. So I'll give you an example just for myself. When I was your age, I knew for a fact that I wanted to get married and have a family. Non-negotiable. And by the way, if that's not what you want, no problem here. This is just for people who do. Second thing, I knew I was going to be home with them. Non-negotiable. Okay, once I have that at the top, every decision I made, who to marry, where to live, what career to choose, those are pretty much the main three, there's probably some others, is much easier to determine when you have that in mind. Now for you, your priority might be something different, but just having it there allows you to structure your life more easily. What happens when you don't do that is that you end up having these expectations. Even if you don't verbalize them, they're in your head. And if they're not self-inflicted expectations, they're definitely coming from the culture. This is how you're supposed to live your life. This is what you need to do. This is what you need to accomplish. And then down here you have reality. And that space in between, disappointment. Those are the people I talk to. American women, in my opinion, are marinating in all that middle ground, in that disappointment, because the expectations are so high and it just doesn't match reality. I don't want you to get there. I don't want you to have to deal with that. And you don't have to. So I'm going to give you 4, if you have a pen, this is good, 4 ways to avoid that, to build a happy, balanced life. Like the real deal, not the way you hear about it in magazines. Tell you how to have a balanced life, and then at the end of the at the end of the article, you're going, that makes no sense or whatever. That's impossible. Number 1, kind of what we just were talking about. Plan ahead. Plan ahead. It sounds simple again, but don't just think 5 or 10 years out. Think 20, 25, 30 years out. What do you see for yourself in your life? Plan it out all the way. Don't just wing it. Number 2, choose a flexible profession. Choose a flexible profession. It's getting easier and easier to do that today, much more so than when I was your age, because of the way we work and internet and all the rest. Find something that you can do either part-time or something you can go in and out of throughout the course of your life rather easily, something you can do from home. There's all these different options for being flexible, so that when the time comes, if you are a person who wants to have a family, you're not left stuck and unable to do what you want to do because you didn't think ahead and make choices based on that. 3, marry smart. Marry smart. What does that mean? I could talk probably the whole time about that subject, actually, but I thought of the 2 biggest that I thought would be helpful. What does that mean? Number 1, first and foremost, never marry anybody whose values and priorities are not 100% aligned with yours. Don't even think about it. Do not think your love is going to overcome this huge gap in the way you want to live your life, in the way you view life, in the way you view not just the obvious things like religion and what have you, but like a big one is marriage. I think there's so many young people who never discuss marriage and what that means. And if the person you marry, for example, is not as invested in even the concept of marriage as an institution, the way you are, he's not going to work as hard as you are, right? It's all this, it's about what's in your head and your mind and how it sounds so simple once again, but attitude is everything. It's going to really carry you no matter what events occur in your life. So if you have the same approach to it, you're way ahead of the game. So values and priorities, number 1. And then this other one, I wouldn't have had to say 40 years ago, but I do today, and I'm sure you guys have probably kept up with this, but you know that women are pulling ahead and doing very well, and men are falling behind. And you've probably heard that there's no good men out there, and what do I do because they're not as smart as I am, they're not working as hard, and that whole mess that's going on in the culture today. Marrying smart means marrying a guy who not only shares your values and priorities, but whether or not he has the same educational background, is at least a steady earner. He has a job. He can hold a job. He's consistent. You don't need to marry a rich man. You just need to marry a steady earner. And the fact that I even have to say this bothers me, but I do, because those are the people I get in my coaching sessions. I'm telling you, at least 80% of the issues are that she's become the breadwinner, and it's not working in their marriage. And I have to unravel that with them and explain why, and we can get into that later if you want, but it's huge, and it's just going to continue getting bigger. So that's a really big taboo subject people don't want to talk about, because we're supposed to be equal, and it shouldn't matter who makes what, and it does matter. But that's a little bit farther than I'm trying to go right now. I'm just saying a lot of these women are not even looking at, maybe, for example, they'll fall in love with someone who's working towards something, but he's not there yet, and then the woman is rising, and then they assume that the guy's going to rise too, but what's happening is she's rising, and he's getting knocked off. He's not feeling that incentive to do well because, she's doing it, and then number of years go by, and she wants to have a, well, here, I'll give you an example. I just had a coaching session last week with a couple from Florida. She's a lawyer. He has an MBA, and I can't remember what his job is, but for whatever reason, she makes double what he makes. And she has a 2-year-old and one on the way. She wants to be home. She wants to quit. He doesn't want her to. Of course he doesn't want her to. They've created this situation where he's depending on her financially. She doesn't want to be dependent on financially. Fortunately, in their case, they've spent the last 8 years together being very frugal, and they have enough savings that by the end of the call, I was able to get her to put it out on paper, because men like to see things in numbers and paper and show it to them that way. I was trying to say how she needs to come up with a plan and show it to him why it will work, for the next 5 years based on the financial situation. So that was fortunate there. But a lot of people, if you don't have that, think about what happens to the marriage then. Think about what happens to that woman in that boat when she literally can't do what she wants to do. The way you avoid that is to marry somebody who's either on a bigger track than you are, or who's at least on the same, or who just at least is going to be consistent income that you can live on. Let's put it that way. Which kind of leads into number 4. Don't make financial decisions prior to having kids that demand 2 incomes. I cannot stress this one enough. It goes to what I was just saying before. Don't make financial decisions prior to having kids, even if you're married with no kids, whether you're married or not, that demand 2 incomes. So that couple from last week are going to be okay because they haven't done that. But I've also known a lot of people who do that, and then she really does have to stay working because all these decisions prior to having kids, they made with the assumption that she was never going to be out of the workforce, because either the culture told her that was not possible, and so she just believed that it wasn't possible, because her mother told her never not have a job. Whatever the reason is, they just followed it and did it, and then they're stuck. They're literally stuck. These 4 things: plan ahead, choose a flexible profession, marry smart, don't make financial decisions prior to having kids that demand 2 incomes. These things will help you avoid calling me in 20 years, although I probably won't be doing it in 20 years, so that you can set up a life that works. Okay, I'm going to shift gears now and talk about sex and dating on campus, which is probably your favorite subject, right? Raise your hand if you think this is true for college students. I feel like students secretly want to date, but no one is willing to say it. Would you say that's true of both men and women, or just the women? Both. Traditional dating no longer exists because there are no rules. Everyone's confused about who's supposed to do what. Yeah. Okay. Couple things. The first thing to know is, how did we get here? How did this happen? What is so hard about living the way people did even 20 years ago, right? Like, dating was definitely, I was in school in the mid-'80s. Dating was definitely a thing. So I'm not that old. I'm 51. So between then and now, 20, 21, 22, and 51, oh my God, 30 years, something went wrong. Something went very, very wrong. The inception, of course, was a sexual revolution. This isn't news to you. I'm sure you know this. But specifically, what happened? So my argument is that it's women ultimately who change the rules, because women are the relationship navigators. Men have no choice really but to follow what women command in the love department. I mean, they can't kiss you unless you let them, for example, right? There's words for that these days. They have to make the overture. You're the receiver. You say yes or no. What happened? Women were told, Americans overall were told, but women specifically got the message that there's no reason why they can't just have sex like men do, like a man can, right? Sex, you should be able to postpone marriage as long as possible like a man can, and sow your oats, because there's no difference between men and women, and it's just the culture that's keeping you down from being able to do that. So that was the inception in the 60s. And like I said, I was in school in the 80s, and then you take it all the way through to today, and it's interesting because It takes a long time for a new idea to really get into the culture and become a thing. And at first people don't know what to do with it, then they kind of try it on, then people maybe don't talk about it too much, and then now it's even worse than it was back in the day. So for example, in my day, there might be women who did that, or I shouldn't even just say women, people who, I'm talking about casual sex, hooking up. They didn't have the word hooking up back then, but who acted in that manner or whatever. But they were oddballs. I mean, it wasn't the norm. You knew that was not the thing. That's just not a smart thing to do. I mean, you just didn't think about it as a smart thing to do. And so it didn't even have a phrase. Fast forward to today, where it's the norm and people are looking to date. Back prior to the sexual revolution, that's how long it takes for a new idea to really do its thing. But it officially has. But here's the thing. Human nature doesn't change just because we change the rules. Right? Society may change, but biology doesn't. So how are we going to marry these new ideas, which are awful, with the reality of human nature? So this is important to understand what I'm saying here, because let me say the first point and then I'll explain. Men are capable of separating sex and emotion in a way that you and I are not. I'm not saying they should. My husband and I have a daughter and a son, and we raise them the same way when it comes to this subject. No one's encouraged to have casual sex. I think it's the dumbest thing ever. But my point is that men are more capable, boys, especially boys, younger boys, stay away from young boys. They're very capable and not aware of themselves yet. They're just burgeoning young men, and it's all coming out, and they don't know what to do with it. And when you're around, it's just really hard for them to contain themselves. I'm thinking of this because I have a daughter now in college down in Texas, and I'm getting just an earful of life on campus in a way that I wasn't even 2 years ago. But at any rate, so that's why you have all these movies and books that talk about, it's women who are waiting by the phone, or I guess you should say text, because they don't have phones anymore, and wondering why the guy hasn't called. It's rarely the other way around, right? That constant theme that you hear and read about, there's a reason for that. And it's just the way we're made. So women's bodies are doused with something called oxytocin. Men have it too, but a much smaller amount. They're much more favored with testosterone. So that oxytocin gets released anytime we have touch of any kind. It causes us to bond. So you probably know women who like to think that they might think that they can disengage after having sex, or not even just sex, but just sexual contact. And then they can't figure out why they care the next day whether or not he calls. That's why. They may up here go, well, I can do this. And then it turns out they can't. So the initial idea that women should be able to have commitment-free sex, in my opinion, was the beginning of the end. That's how we landed here, from that one ill-fated idea. And then the second one's a little bit more complicated. Has anybody heard of sexual market value? Sexual market value is what makes men and women desirable to each other. And it's a very long-standing evolutionary concept that is still with us today, even though, once again, things have changed. It's still existent. And it has to do with the difference between what men and women look for in each other. So if you look at the science on this strictly, it's going to sound crass, so just stay with me. I have to push love out of the equation for a moment. Men look for fertility and beauty. That's where their eyes are geared to go. The main traits women look for in a man are resources and status. Now, at face value, that might sound, well, that doesn't sound very good. I mean, he's just looking for her looks, and she just wants his money. Well, first of all, I didn't make this up. This is well known in the science community. But my point is, there's a reason for it, okay? And it's still with us now. That's the point. When women are looking at whether or not a man can do well in life, it's not because they're materialistic. It's because they know somewhere in the back of their minds, no matter how educated and self-sufficient they are economically, that they're the ones who get pregnant. And someday, you're going to want and need to lean on a man to be able to handle financially his family, even if it's just for a few years. Because if you don't, then you know you don't even have any options to be with your baby if you want to be. So we're programmed to look for that. So it does make sense. It's just kind of uncomfortable and not really the part of, love and romance we like to talk about, but there's a reason for it. The thing that happens is that men's sexual market value rises over time, and a woman's doesn't. So you've probably heard a lot about 30-something women who are asking, where have all the good men gone? These are the women in their 30s who never married and are now looking to get married, and they want to marry a man of similar or equal status, because the higher up they've gone in the ladder, they don't want to go, quote-unquote, down. They want someone similar or higher. And the men of their same age have no problem looking down, because when women rise with their status, that doesn't mean anything to men. Men don't care how high what your economic prospects are. They're not looking to depend on you. These are the types of things that you'll never hear in any magazine article or on TV, because again, we're supposed to be the same. Equality has come to mean sameness. It's not equality of opportunity, which everybody in this room would approve of and would want, and we have it in spades. But equality of outcome is very different. That's going to get too political, so I'm not going to go down that road, but that's where we are today, is sameness, not equality of opportunity. Okay, and we like to think what I just explained there, the sexual market value and the differences between men and women with the reaction to sex, no longer matters because of the changing gender roles of the last several decades. But it does matter because human nature doesn't change. That's why it matters. So in the same way the birth control pill didn't change, they thought, in addition to the cultural message of, uncommitted sex, casual sex is great, free sex, they called it back then, because you have the birth control pill, so why not? In the same way that the birth control pill doesn't make women any more like men, because their response to sex is still the same, even though they can technically avoid pregnancy the way men can, they still can't become men because their reaction to the act itself is so different. In the same way that doesn't translate, same goes with the sexual market value. So at the end of the day, men and women are not sexual equals. You want equality in the workplace? Have at it. Have a field day. It doesn't work in love. It just doesn't. If you move through the world thinking otherwise, like the culture wants you to do, then you're going to be very disappointed.